Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is live from my office. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. May I add, you look really nice today. No, you did not click on the wrong podcast. This is live from my office. I am not Steve Cochran, though, but I know him pretty well. I'm Ross Cochran, and I am the producer of this program. And for the next couple of weeks, you are stuck with me. How did Steve get fired from his own podcast, you might ask? But he actually didn't get fired this time. He is actually having a full right knee replacement because he believes that it's never too late to follow your dreams, and he will be pursuing his lifelong dream of joining the Rockettes as soon as he's able. I'm pulling for you, Pops. But while he's out, it doesn't mean that you're not going to hear from him. We're going to be airing some of our favorite conversations that we've had in the 2 seasons of Live from My Office. And today you're going to hear from Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown. Superintendent David Brown has been on the podcast twice now, so you're going to hear the conversation that we first aired on January 6th of this year. And really, though, it's a timely conversation. My dad and Chief David Brown discuss the future of Chicago and how they both see the police being able to help shape what this city can ultimately become. But what you're going to hear most of all in this conversation is 2 people who are actually listening to each other. And no matter where you fall on any sort of political spectrum or any sort of tension associated with dealing with the police or not, I hope that you follow the example that Chief David Brown sets in this podcast by just listening and paying attention. Let's just agree to start from there. So thank you for listening. We will get to that conversation with David Brown right after the break.
The title sponsor of Live from My Office is David Hochberg and Team Hochberg, part of Homeside Financial. You can buy a home or refinance at 855-563-2843. That's 855-56-DAVID, or go to 56david.com. When you go to the website, you can request a free quote right there. And I can tell you from knowing how they do their business, your job gets a whole lot easier. Just go through that extra step, get them the documents they need, and they will deliver money, as in savings, to you in a way you didn't think was possible. And there you go. You could check that off your stress list of things you should have done by now. The refinance process with Team Hochberg is as good as it gets. And all the members of Team Hochberg, they just want to save you money. And they do it all the time. They've done it for me and for my family. And for people I've worked with through the years, they are what they claim to be. It's David Hochberg, Homeside Financial, an equal housing lender, NMLS number 1124061. It is a pleasure to once again welcome to Live from My Office, Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown. The best of the holidays to you, sir.
Thank you, Steve, and the same to you and your listeners. Thank you so much.
By the way, what do you get the police superintendent for Christmas? Are you hard to shop for?
I'm actually very hard to shop for because there's some rules that you can't gift me up. So you can't report to me and gift me as a rule. You know, you don't want any ethical lapses or transactional gifts. You know what I mean? So, I'm hard to shop for.
Yeah, I suppose so. But we men, we're always, there's complaints about us being hard to shop for. But when you have your family, you have everything. So what else do you need?
Well, I'm a Texas guy, so this is really cold to me. And I know this is just the beginning. So heavy socks, a little bit of extra layers of underwear and like that.
Yeah. That's that Dallas blood, not completely gone yet, is it?
No, not at all. This is something to get used to.
All right, so listen, you and I talked over the summer, and you were cautiously optimistic, as was I, about the city that I love and that you're growing to love. You're probably already there, and that's Chicago. And I do
love Chicago. I really do.
I would argue that you got this job in April at just about the toughest time you could possibly get. I mean, the stuff that's happened is crazy. Between COVID and the tragedy of George Floyd and the riots, you got to be a tired man.
2020 really has been a year like no other year in our country's history. It's really seriously a perfect storm of events, not just the pandemic and George Floyd's murder on videotape, but the the reckoning around race in this country that, has really included policing, but other industries, and people have expressed their anger in various ways. But a year like no other. Steve, really, a year like no other.
Yeah, and as an African-American man leading this police force, one of the biggest cities in the world, what do you have, 13,000 cops?
13,000.
Yeah,
second largest in the country.
Yeah, and I think you know me well enough to know what a supporter I am, and people just don't have any clue what it takes to get up every day and do this job. But part of the respect I have for your men and women and what you've done for your whole career is you get up, you do it, you don't bitch. Maybe you need to bitch a little more. Maybe the public needs to have a better understanding how hard this gig is.
Well, let me on that same note, let's talk about what's happened this year as it relates to violence. Number one, obviously homicides are up over 50%. Shootings are up over 50%. But officers shot at or shot are up 300% this year.
It's unbelievable.
We've had 79 officers shot at or shot. That's a 300% increase over last year. And I would argue speaks to the courage and bravery of our officers to run toward danger during the most challenging time in policing history.
And that challenge, a lot of it comes from this fact that we live in a world now where everybody thinks they have the answer because they have a phone with a camera on it. There's a lot of focus on body cams, and that's fair. I think you were one of the leading guys in the country when you were running the Dallas department for those years to try to have more police accountability. But how do
I think what body cams will do, obviously, show your flaws, but more prominently, it'll show all the great, committed, dedicated work that our officers do day in and day out, more so than it will show flaws. I think we all have to accept that we are human and we make mistakes. But the vast majority of officers caught on videotape, you'd be very proud of their behavior.
But how do you do your job? How do you create the law and order we all allegedly want to live in? I know I do. In a world where everybody's got a camera and everybody's got editing software and they can make the picture be anything they want, and 5 minutes later it's on Facebook.
I think one of the things you have to do is not just depend on mainstream media to tell the great story of what police do for this country. I think you have to be in the social media space, very aggressively telling the story of the great work that officers do day in and day out. You can't be silent. And I would encourage our silent majority of supporters for law enforcement to do the same, that the loud voices often drown out the silent majority. And we just ought to be in that space of social media, very aggressively telling the great news of what police officers do for this country.
Yeah, and I know, and you certainly know, but I know in some of the toughest neighborhoods in Chicago, there's folks that the best part of their day is when they see a cop on their corner or whatever, so they can just live their lives. I'd love to see the CPD start telling those stories and let the people in the neighborhood say, listen, I am so glad these guys are here.
Yeah, we have many, not just the pastors in the faith community and the communities of color, but you have many people who are victims of crime that are saved by these officers running toward danger when no one else will come. I put it this way, Chicago police officers still make house calls.
Right.
Not many other parts of government will make a house call when you call, and we're the last best service for our citizens, for our residents when they need help.
I'm glad you brought that up because there's analytics for everything now. And you're a sports fan, and I've talked about sports forever, and analytics are everywhere. And statistics in the police department can bog you down or they can lift you up. I could easily make the argument that Chicago was a more violent city in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s than it is today. Yes. But do you see the improvement, maybe not as fast as you want it, but do you see the improvement going in the right direction?
If you just go ahead and accept that this year was, because we had a pandemic, is an outlier year and not consistent with what's happened over the many years since the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you will see a continued decline. This year, because of COVID, our judges, jailers, and jurors have slowed to a crawl, and it really has been crippled by COVID-19. And COVID-19 is also compounding negative impacts on community policing and violence interrupters. So if you just are able to set that aside and look at 2020 for what it is, a year like no other, but look at the great work reducing violent crime in this city, I would still be encouraged that we are, once we get past the vaccine, we're on the right trajectory.
And it's probably an unfair question to ask because of COVID and because the city it's not locked down, but the city is not what it should be on any given day of the year. But is Chicago a safe place to be now, as of today?
I would argue, but for the pandemic's impact on the criminal justice system, the courts primarily, we would have a different conversation about violence in this city. Mm-hmm. No one can control this pandemic. This pandemic has raged for well over 9, going on 10 months now, and it seems we're in the worst of it. But if you set that aside, if you can, many people can't look past the current events and look at, the increase in homicides as a failure. But I would argue, but for cops running toward danger, we would be in much worse circumstances, to be quite honest.
And a lot of this, maybe all of it, is about trust and communication. The stuff that worked for you in Dallas, have you been able to bring those programs in and get them instituted here, as crazy as this year has been, or is that going to take a little longer?
Well, we're 7 months in, but we have started the process of implementing a strategic plan that includes building trust as a linchpin to fighting crime, reducing crime. Because you need the trust of the community. I think when the community fails to have trust in government overall, I think it hurts the community much more than any place else. Because we need the community members to trust us, to give us tips and clues, to tell us what we can do to be preventative of violence. So we have to do the things that build on trust, that build bridges. And again, we just can't do it alone, Steve. We just can't.
No, in things like the old no snitch policy, there's been less of that, I think, right?
Well, we are starting to see a little glimpse of people coming forward. We had a couple of incidents where the community stood up and pushed back against all the negativity with protests and said, not in my community. We had a horrific young person killed. And the community came forward and gave us information that broke the case, and we were able to bring the offender to justice. So we're starting to see some glimpses. We got a long way to go in this area, Steve. There's been quite the no-stitching narrative, and we've just got to push through it and talk about our victims much more than we talk about our offenders and their rights. Because
of the prominence of your position, you get covered at a level that a lot of people who are in your position don't. Size of the city, the fact that it's Chicago's history, all of those things. And from politics, I know you're assistant city manager in Dallas. You understand that side of it as well. And you got to somehow do a hybrid thing where you're working both sides to get the job done. Are the politics of Chicago, the infamous politics of Chicago and the state of Illinois, helping, hurting, or you don't know yet?
It's a challenge, to be quite honest with you. It's much different than I'm familiar with. I really think that I have to work within the confines of the political landscape. I have to win friends and influence people to do things maybe outside their normal way of thinking about criminal justice. I think the story is untold about how effective I can be at navigating the political landscape here. It's quite different, and there's deep relationships as well. And I just wouldn't assume in 7 months that I can build strong relationships. I would argue a little bit more time. I'm committed to it, but a little bit more time is needed to maybe push through some thoughts that I have regarding criminal justice. Number one being, I've made some headway on electronic monitoring. I complained about that for my first several months here, that this program is broken. We need a real electronic monitoring program if we're going to do this. And the sheriff has got on board. We've got some collaboration between electronic monitoring and everyone going on to a GPS system rather than a free-for-all system that we had no monitoring. to where we're actually able to collaborate with the sheriff on electronic monitoring.
Is that part of what we need for prison reform, too, that we have proper monitoring so we're not just housing people because we got nothing else we can do?
Yeah, proper monitoring, and I think we need to have a more robust risk assessment of people we think should be on the street versus who should be incarcerated.
Right.
I don't advocate mass incarceration, but I think a risk assessment of people who would harm the community if they released should be more robust than it is now. So I'm going to be trying to obviously win friends and influence people in the area of risk assessment of who gets released.
We were talking about politics. Now, you got an FOP head who is making a lot of noise by saying a lot of controversial things. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he has his rank and file in his best interest, but I think he needs to prove that as well. What's the status of the folks that work for you, morale-wise and belief-wise? Are they on the team?
It's the one thing, and I would roll in officer wellness with the politics of just police officers in the city and the FOP. It's my primary goal to ensure that I celebrate these officers and the hard work. And I've got to be their number one cheerleader. And there's no conflict with me holding those accountable that don't do the job right and bragging about the vast majority that do. And I'm actually a proud cheerleader for cops who do the job right. And I'm, again, celebrating their great bravery and courage. We can't do that enough. And I would just, ask your listeners, anytime you see a police officer, please say a kind word. Thank them for their service. It goes a long way in continuing to have these people risk their lives for us.
Yeah, and I would say
so that's no small thing.
No, and more now than ever. Just a thank you is a big deal. But there's another hurdle here in Chicago, which, look, I know this stuff's important, and I believe that COPA is well intended, but the Citizens Office of Police Accountability, they're not cops. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because they have outside perspective to bring in, but it also can be a bad thing because they can get in the way of doing the job. How do you balance what COPA is trying to do with what you're trying to do?
I actually been talking with the mayor about this. Delayed investigations are just wrought with conspiracy theories. COPA's got to get with it and get these investigations concluded. These officers are kept lingering. It doesn't speak to accountability because it's so delayed. I would just push for any kind of fast-track investigation, particularly the high-profile. Again, I would love to include more collaboration with COPA. I understand the need for oversight. I really do understand the history here. But again, these long delays in investigations are just not helpful at all. It just speaks to what we already are in, a conspiratorial kind of climate in this country. It just adds to that.
Now, the public is entitled to know when things are problematic, but I would argue we're not entitled to know when it violates due process in an investigation, and it seems like we want it both ways. Do you have that sense or not?
Yeah, we are a nation of laws, so due process has to be at the forefront of everything we do. I say it this way: you don't want to treat your officers one way and then demand that they treat the citizens another way.
Right.
So if you want officers to treat people with respect, you have to treat officers with respect and give them their due process while still holding firm to hold them accountable when they make a mistake. But you can't, be on your high horse with everything's got to be done right in one area, and then when it comes to officers, we break every due process rule to get our revenge. That's just not helpful at all. It doesn't encourage people in any way that things are fair. So I would just argue, let's be fair to everyone. Let's still hold officers accountable, but let's be fair.
I think that people, if they take a step back, they have a sense of this. And I feel very badly about what happened to Anjanette Young. It was a story that CBS 2 made a very big deal in the past couple of weeks about an arrest in a wrong house.
Right.
A couple of things here. How does that happen? Does it happen a lot? and how do you avoid it happening? I mean, are those easy answers at all?
They're not easy answers. This is 2 years ago, nearly 2 years ago. So long before I was on the job, but I will just say this. I've accepted that it's my responsibility to fix it. One of the things that search warrants have to do is they have to have very strong oversight, not just depending on the criminal justice process because the judge signs the warrants. It's internally within CPD, we have to have strong oversight. You can't have everyone serving search warrants. And when you go to the wrong house, because mistakes are going to happen because you're utilizing informants that might point you toward a house they think this guy's in, and the guy's moved and someone else moved in. I mean, it could be various reasons. I'm just talking broadly, not Miss Young's case, but you have to have strong oversight, and you just admit your mistakes. Just be the first to admit your mistakes and apologize, and don't try to hide anything you've done. I would argue that it's the cover-up more than anything that causes people to really be upset with what happened here.
Yeah, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. And in the case of Anjanette Young, pardon me, my throat's a little froggy, I guess, from the holidays. But in the case of Ms. Young, a lot's been made of the fact that she was handcuffed naked in her house and it was the wrong house. It's a horrible situation. I get that. I really do. And I feel terribly for her. But this also goes to when we in the media report the number of shots that are fired in a situation. A police officer is trained to neutralize the situation that they believe they're in first. Yes?
Well, let's make sure we're careful with this segue to officer safety. When you're in the wrong house, there ought to be some supervisory oversight that begins to recognize this is not a violent place. And then you should switch over to making sure you do everything you can to respect the people in the house. Even if Miss Young's house was the right house, Steve, I would argue you allow her to get dressed, even if it's the right house.
Right.
So I would push back a little on the narrative of officer safety, and you got to do these things this way. I would argue that if Miss Young is the biggest criminal in Chicago, you let her get dressed. So I just don't have the thoughts of officer safety being a blank check to treat anyone any kind of way.
Well, that's good to hear. And I wasn't going down that road, but I certainly appreciate the clarity and the explanation, because it does feel like there should be time and somebody, maybe a senior officer on any detail, who can say, hold on.
Yeah.
Let her get dressed, or this is not, is what we thought it was, or maybe we need to double check this or that. But, mix into that, obviously, is the safety of the situation as well for everybody involved. We're going to run out of time quickly here, and I know you got a lot to do, and I know you're not all that fond of talking about you, but I think understanding and communication and knowing who you are is a big part of this as well. And we talked about this a little bit in the spring, but you got training in counterterrorism. I know you worked at the FBI, the Secret Service on some training as well.
Yes.
You went through a horrible situation in Dallas where 5 of your officers were killed. A ton of officers were wounded as well. But you've had tons of personal tragedy that I don't think people understand. You lost a partner, you lost a brother, you lost your son, all to violence. And I don't know. What's kept you in the game? Why continue to do this? I mean, thank you for doing it, but why continue to do it when you've been through so much yourself?
Well, I have this very strong personal faith. I'm not ashamed to say I'm a Christian, Steve.
Good,
and I have a strong personal faith. And I just have this North Star. I know strongly from the way I was raised, right from wrong. And I feel like I can contribute to a city like Chicago in steering the ship in the right direction. And I'm really am humbled to have this opportunity. And I'm deeply committed to this city, and I hope it shows. I hope that, in the end, people look at my tenure and will say, he did Chicago right. And that's really the reward that I'm hoping for at some point.
Last question, quick two-parter here, but it's important for cops that are listening, who have heard this or heard about it and are listening now. What do you want them to know from you? What would you like to say to any officer listening now?
Thank you for 2020. Thank you for enduring. You're my heroes. And I believe strongly history will look back on 2020 and say, along with healthcare workers, first responders, help save this democracy.
100%. And what do you want to say to the citizens, some of which might be skeptical about what's getting done? What's the message to the public?
We're here to serve you. And it's been a tough year, but we're all in this together. And you have a committed, dedicated, and brave and courageous police department at your service.
Say thank you when you can. Speak up if you think there's something wrong. Make the call. You don't have to give up your name if you're concerned about your anonymity, but never, ever, ever avoid that sense inside you that you need a police officer. Pick up that phone, make the call. Superintendent Brown, I really appreciate the time. I think it's an important message to get out. I hope we can do it again, and I look forward to a 2021 that's better for all of us. So stay safe.
Happy New Year to you, Steve, and to your listeners.
All the best.
Care.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for listening to Live from My Office, a service of Monkey Run Productions. All rights reserved. The podcast is hosted by Steve Cochran, and it's mixed, edited, and produced by me, Ross Cochran. Support the show by subscribing wherever you're listening and by telling your friends about it. Follow Steve on all social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And make sure you check out this episode's show notes for relevant information discussed during the conversations. You can also email the show directly at thecochranshow@gmail.com with any questions or comments. And that's the best place to tell us about your favorite nonprofit so we can make sure we mention them on the next episode. Steve is available for corporate speaking gigs. He would love to MC your event. And occasionally, he's funny. Thank you for listening. Head to cochranshow.com for more.